maybe I'll go in and see if I can retrieve something. And it wasn't. It was the hill behind there.
Right.
After years of living in silence, Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood, at the age of 95, has unexpectedly shaken the world. Not only has he broken his silence about the final years of his life, but he has also candidly revealed a list of people he never wants to see at his funeral. Why would a heroic, stoic, and resolute icon on screen now share such bitter and fierce sentiments? Who are the names that Clint Eastwood has carried resentment for throughout his life? And what has prompted him to publicly disclose the truth at this very moment? The story behind these shocking declarations is sure to leave you speechless. Clint Eastwood was born on May 31st, 1930, in San Francisco, at the height of the Great Depression. The timing of his arrival into the world could not have been more symbolic. America was struggling to survive an era of financial despair, and out of that turbulence emerged a boy who would later become the quintessential screen warrior, carrying with him the quiet resilience and steel-willed determination that hardship often breeds. Even at birth, there was something unusual about him. Weighing over 11 pounds, the newborn Eastwood was nicknamed Samson by nurses, a biblical reference to strength and defiance that, in hindsight, seemed almost prophetic. His parents, Clinton Eastwood Sr., a steelworker, and Ruth Wood, a factory worker and later a secretary, were ordinary people trying to hold a family together during extraordinary times. The Eastwoods lived modestly, moving frequently across California in search of work as the Depression left industries unstable and wages scarce. For young Clint, these years of upheaval would forge a sense of toughness and adaptability that became both his personal creed and professional trademark. He was not born into privilege, nor was his path paved with opportunity. Instead, Clint Eastwood was a product of the American struggle, a man shaped by scarcity and forged by persistence. It is perhaps this foundation that gave Eastwood his unique screen presence. When audiences first encountered him, especially in the 1960s spaghetti westerns of Sergio Leone, there was an authenticity about his characters that transcended the screen. The Man with No Name was not a theatrical creation, but an extension of the boy who had grown up watching his father labor in steel mills, who had watched his family pack up belongings time and again to start over. His silence, his economy of words, his piercing stare. These were not just acting choices, but the cinematic distillation of a childhood marked by resilience. Eastwood did not play at being strong. He was strength, molded in the crucible of Depression-era America. But Eastwood's story is not merely one of personal hardship overcome. It is a narrative that reflects the shifting cultural landscape of the United States. Born into a world teetering on the brink of collapse, he matured alongside a nation that reinvented itself after war, expanded through prosperity, and questioned its values in times of upheaval. To trace Eastwood's life is to trace the evolution of American masculinity. From the stoic provider of the 1930s to the rugged cowboy of the 1960s to the conflicted anti-hero of the post-Vietnam era, and finally to the reflective elder statesman of the 21st century. Few actors have managed to embody, adapt, and redefine the cultural archetype of manhood in the way Eastwood has. By the late 1950s, Clint Eastwood had already spent years lingering on the edges of Hollywood, a tall, lean figure often dismissed for being too stiff, too unemotional, or simply too different. Casting directors were not sure what to make of him. He wasn't a classic matinee idol in the mold of Rock Hudson, nor was he the method-acting type like Marlon Brando. In fact, for a while it seemed his destiny was to be forever cast as the nameless extra, another handsome face swallowed by the machinery of Hollywood. But what if Eastwood had walked away then? What if the young man, discouraged by rejection, had returned to ordinary work, perhaps as a logger in Oregon or a gas station attendant in Los Angeles? The world of cinema would have lost one of its most enduring figures, and the Western genre may have faded into obscurity years earlier than it did. Instead, fate intervened in 1959 with Rawhide, a television Western that transformed Eastwood from obscurity into a household name. For 7 years, he embodied Rowdy Yates, a youthful cattle driver whose grit and charisma captivated millions of Americans glued to their TV screens. Though Eastwood himself reportedly grew weary of playing the same role, this series laid the foundation for everything that would follow. It was in those years of long shoots, dusty sets, and endless scripts that he honed his craft and developed the stoic minimalism that would later become his hallmark. And then came Italy. When Sergio Leone cast Eastwood in A Fistful of Dollars, 1964, neither man could have predicted the cultural earthquake about to unfold. The so-called spaghetti western was considered a gamble, a low-budget European take on a fading American genre. But Eastwood's portrayal of the enigmatic gunfighter, with his poncho slung carelessly over one shoulder, his cigar clenched between teeth, and that squint that seemed to pierce the soul, was unlike anything audiences had ever seen. By the time For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly followed, Eastwood was no longer just an actor. He was an international symbol of rugged defiance. The man with no name became more than a character. It was a myth, an archetype, a mirror of the human fascination with power, silence, and survival. What if Leone had chosen another actor, perhaps a more polished Hollywood star? Could anyone else have carried that same aura of menace and mystery? Almost certainly not. Eastwood's performance was not born of artifice, but of authenticity. Of a man who had grown up under the shadow of hardship and understood instinctively that words were often less powerful than silence. Hollywood soon came calling again, and Eastwood returned with another role that would cement his legacy: Inspector Dirty Harry Callahan. First appearing in 1971, Harry Callahan was the answer to a restless America, an era plagued by crime, political scandal, and disillusionment. With his .44 Magnum and his uncompromising sense of justice, Harry became the embodiment of the tough, no-nonsense lawman that audiences both feared and adored. His catchphrases entered the cultural bloodstream. His grim determination reflected the anxieties of the times. If the Westerns had turned Eastwood into a legend, then Dirty Harry made him a cultural phenomenon. But Eastwood was not content to be typecast as the eternal gunfighter or the eternal cop. In the shadows of his fame, he studied, observed, and plotted a transition that would redefine his career. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, he had already stepped behind the camera, proving that his vision extended beyond the lens of a gun barrel. His directorial voice was quiet, deliberate, and deeply personal. Then, in 1992, came Unforgiven, a masterpiece that dismantled the very myths Eastwood had helped to build. Here he played William Money, an aging outlaw haunted by violence and regret, a character that forced audiences to question their own fascination with bloodshed and vengeance. The film swept the Academy Awards, earning Eastwood Best Director and Best Picture, and confirmed what some had already suspected. Clint Eastwood was not just a star. He was a storyteller of rare depth and insight. Over the years, more triumphs followed. $1 Million Baby, 2004. A Heartbreaking Tale of Sacrifice and Redemption, Gran Torino, 2008. A Meditation on Prejudice, Aging, and Reconciliation, and American Sniper, 2014. A provocative look at modern warfare and its psychological toll. Each film revealed new layers of Eastwood's artistry, proving that he was never satisfied with resting on past glories. Yet his talents did not stop at acting or directing. Few know that Eastwood is a devoted jazz pianist, often composing music for his films, his melodies as restrained and haunting as his performances. He also turned to politics, serving as mayor of Carmel by the Sea in the 1980s, where his unpretentious approach to governance won the affection of residents. And in business, he quietly built a portfolio that ensured his independence in a world where studios often dictated creative choices. For all the triumphs that define Clint Eastwood's professional journey, his private life reads like a sprawling, unfinished screenplay. Part romance, part tragedy, part mystery. If his on-screen characters were stoic men of few words, then his personal relationships often revealed a far more complicated narrative, full of passion, conflict, and contradictions. It is perhaps this very duality, the strong, silent hero admired by millions, and the flawed, restless man behind closed doors, that has made Eastwood endlessly fascinating not only as an artist, but as a human being. Eastwood's life off-set has been marked by a string of high-profile romances, failed marriages, and a constellation of children who each carry a fragment of his legacy. He has been married twice, first to Maggie Johnson, his college sweetheart, with whom he shared 3 decades of marriage before their union dissolved under the weight of infidelities and long stretches apart. His second marriage to news anchor Dina Ruiz ended in 2014, marking yet another chapter of personal upheaval. Between and beyond these marriages, Eastwood's name became linked with an array of women: Hollywood starlets, models, and sometimes women far removed from the spotlight, each adding a new twist to his already complex narrative. At least 8 children bear his name, though some accounts suggest the number may be higher, as rumors and speculation have followed him for decades. Among them, several have pursued creative paths. Kyle Eastwood, a talented jazz bassist and composer, often collaborates with his father's films, weaving soundscapes that echo Clint's own love of music. Scott Eastwood, with his rugged good looks and undeniable charisma, has carved out a career as a rising actor, sometimes eerily reminiscent of his father in his youth. Allison Eastwood has taken a different route, pursuing directing with a sharp eye for intimate human stories. In each of them, there are echoes of Clint's own artistry, a reminder that, for all the fractures in his romantic life, his bloodline continues to shape the arts in new ways. And yet, this tangled web of relationships has not been without pain. What if Eastwood had been the type of man who settled into a single marriage, who resisted the allure of Hollywood's temptations and kept his family life sheltered from scandal? His personal story might read cleaner, less controversial, more conventional. But would he still be the same artist? The same restless creative force who dared to reinvent himself time and again? Some argue that Eastwood's personal restlessness, the same hunger that drew him from acting to directing, from westerns to war dramas, is mirrored in his love life, a man forever searching, forever unwilling to stand still. Still, amidst the chaos, Eastwood has worked to maintain connections with his children. Unlike many celebrities who lose touch with their offspring in the whirlwind of fame, Clint is known for attending family gatherings, supporting his children's endeavors, and at times even inviting them onto his sets. There are moments captured in candid photographs of the Eastwood clan assembled together, smiling, laughing, bridging decades of complicated history with simple gestures of belonging. Perhaps these moments are his way of writing a quieter, more intimate script, one that will never appear on screen but will resonate far deeper in the lives of those closest to him. The wounds, however, are real. Broken marriages, publicized affairs, and the constant scrutiny of tabloids have left their mark. One could imagine Eastwood, late at night, seated at his beloved piano, fingers tracing a jazz melody, using music as both confession and balm. What if, in another life, he had pursued music full-time, avoiding the spotlight of Hollywood entirely? Would his relationships have been less turbulent, or would the same restless spirit still have driven him into tangled romances and fractured bonds? It is tempting to view Eastwood's love life as a flaw, a counterweight to his cinematic brilliance. But perhaps it is better understood as part of the same human complexity that fuels his art. Just as his films rarely depict perfect heroes, Eastwood himself is no perfect man. He has lived fully, made mistakes, and confronted the consequences. In this sense, his personal life mirrors the themes of his greatest films: redemption, regret, resilience. As Clint Eastwood approaches his 95th year, his legend seems indestructible, etched into the granite of Hollywood history, whispered through the canyons of American culture. For decades, he has been the man of silence, the figure who lets his films do the talking. Yet now, in a move that stunned both admirers and critics, Eastwood chose to break that silence with a revelation as stark as one of his Western's landscapes. A list of names, carefully chosen, of those he does not wish to see at his funeral. The announcement was not made with bitterness, but with the same measured cadence that defined his career. Calm, deliberate, unflinching. To many, it felt like the last plot twist in a film only Clint Eastwood could write. A confession that was both deeply personal and historically symbolic. Because these names, more than mere individuals, represented conflicts, rivalries, and philosophical divides that have shaped not only Eastwood's life, but the entire story of Hollywood itself. At the top of the list was John Wayne, the Duke himself. Though Wayne died in 1979, Eastwood's choice carried a symbolic weight. Both men had defined the Western hero for their respective generations, yet they clashed sharply in vision. Wayne believed in the clean-cut, patriotic cowboy, a man whose morality was as clear as his quick draw. Eastwood, by contrast, embodied the anti-hero, scarred by violence, cynical yet strangely noble in his silence. There were whispers in Hollywood that Wayne once called Eastwood's films anti-American. What if the two men had collaborated instead of collided? Imagine a film where Wayne's traditional cowboy rode alongside Eastwood's nameless drifter. The clash of mythologies might have reshaped the entire genre. But it never happened. And perhaps that absence, that refusal, is why Eastwood still bristles at the memory. Another name was Leonardo DiCaprio, one of the brightest stars of modern Hollywood. Their paths famously crossed in J. Edgar, 2011, a film Eastwood directed and DiCaprio headlined. Though the collaboration was civil, Eastwood reportedly viewed DiCaprio as the face of a new Hollywood, a generation steeped in progressive politics, environmental activism, and public declarations that, to Eastwood's stoic sensibility, felt like moral theater. What if Eastwood had embraced this generation instead of distancing himself? Could he have mentored DiCaprio, bridging the gap between old and new? Instead, the divide grew sharper, a cultural canyon carved by ideology as much as artistry. Then came Tom Hanks, America's everyman, beloved for his warmth and decency. To exclude Hanks seemed almost sacrilegious to the Hollywood establishment. But for Eastwood, the reasoning was simple. Hanks symbolized a softness, a comforting reassurance that felt alien to Eastwood's world of grit, violence, and moral ambiguity. In a way, Eastwood's rejection of Hanks was less personal than symbolic, a reminder that his own vision of cinema was never about making audiences comfortable, but about confronting them with hard truths. Spike Lee's name was next, and here the conflict was more direct. Lee had once criticized Eastwood for his war epics, particularly for their lack of black soldiers, a point that sparked a very public spat. Eastwood fired back, refusing to alter his vision to satisfy critics. The wounds never healed. What if, instead of clashing, the two had found common ground, collaborated even, on a project that examined war and race with both men's uncompromising honesty? It is one of Hollywood's many what-ifs, a chapter unwritten, now forever closed. Michael Moore was another inclusion, unsurprising to those who remember Eastwood's fiery defense of American Sniper. Moore's criticisms of the film provoked one of Eastwood's rare public outbursts, during which he half-joked, though with Clint, jokes often sounded like threats, that he might shoot the filmmaker. Their feud symbolized two visions of America: Moore's skeptical, critical eye against Eastwood's respect for the soldier's sacrifice. Both men, in their own ways, sought truth, but their truths were irreconcilable. And finally, the most personal name of all, Sondra Locke. Once Eastwood's lover, muse, and collaborator, Locke's relationship with him burned brightly before collapsing into bitter lawsuits and recriminations. To include her on the list was less about anger and more about unresolved pain. Their story remains one of Hollywood's great romantic tragedies, two artists bound by passion, undone by betrayal. What if reconciliation had been possible? What if, instead of courtrooms, their final conversations had been shared over a quiet piano, a glass of wine, a smile of forgiveness? That possibility, like so many in Eastwood's life, now lives only in speculation. The list, as shocking as it may seem, is not simply about exclusion. It is a statement of Eastwood's worldview. Unflinching, uncompromising, unwilling to conform to the tidy narratives others might write for him. In revealing these names, Eastwood did what he has always done: forced the world to confront complexity, to sit in discomfort, to recognize that legends are not made of perfection but of scars, grudges, and unresolved conflicts. Perhaps in the end, Eastwood's funeral will not be a place of harmony, nor should it be. It will be, like his films, a mirror of America itself. Messy, divided, contradictory, yet undeniably powerful. And maybe that is exactly how Clint Eastwood would want it. The revelation of Clint Eastwood's funeral blacklist left Hollywood shaken, but perhaps it should not have come as a surprise. For nearly a century, Eastwood has spoken his truth without compromise, wielding honesty like a revolver at high noon. At 95, a man has no reason to soften his words, no reason to perform for applause. In truth, this startling declaration may be his last great performance, not a role scripted by others, but a statement carved from the marrow of his own life. And yet, as the dust settles on that revelation, what lingers is not bitterness, but a sense of awe. Here is a man who has lived many lives, a struggling actor dismissed as too stiff in the 1950s, a television cowboy who turned into an international icon, a box office powerhouse, a visionary director, a jazz musician, a politician, a father, a lover, a fighter, a survivor. Clint Eastwood is not just one story. He is a library of stories, bound together by grit and contradictions. Imagine for a moment if Eastwood had chosen differently along the way. What if he had listened to the casting agents who once told him he had no future in Hollywood? What if he had stayed in television, never daring to gamble on the spaghetti westerns that would catapult him to stardom? What if Unforgiven had never been made, and Eastwood's career had ended not with a bang, but with a whimper? History would have written him as a minor star of a forgotten era, another face lost in Hollywood's endless gallery. Instead, by choosing risk over safety, silence over excess, Eastwood forged himself into something rarer than stardom, a legend. Now, at the twilight of his life, Clint Eastwood forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, not only about him, but about ourselves. His list of the unwelcome is not just about personal grudges. It is a mirror reflecting the tensions of Hollywood, the rivalries that define artistry, the wounds that never quite heal. Perhaps the message beneath it all is simple. Greatness does not mean harmony. Greatness, in fact, may be born from discord, from standing firm when others bend, from daring to be disliked in order to stay true. But beyond the controversies, beyond the storms of his personal and professional battles, Eastwood leaves us with something deeper, a body of work that speaks to human resilience. From the dusty plains of Leone's westerns to the moral dilemmas of Million Dollar Baby, from the grim shadows of Dirty Harry to the haunting self-reflection of Gran Torino, his films are not just entertainment. They are meditations on what it means to live, to fight, to lose, to endure. And so, as we picture the day when the curtain finally falls on Clint Eastwood's extraordinary life, we are reminded of the paradox at its heart. He is the immortal cowboy riding into the sunset, yet also the flawed man who leaves behind complicated relationships and unanswered questions. He is the hero, the anti-hero, and at times the villain of his own story. What if, when that final day comes, the very people he excluded still arrive to pay their respects? Would Clint, from wherever he may be, narrow his eyes in that familiar squint, or allow himself the rarest of smiles? Perhaps even he does not know. And now, dear viewers, the story turns to you. Clint Eastwood's life is not just a chronicle of Hollywood. It is a mirror in which we see courage, mistakes, passion, and survival. His blacklist may shock, but it also invites us to ask, who would we welcome at the end of our journey, and who would we turn away? Clint Eastwood lived without fear, and he leaves us with a challenge: to face our own truths just as boldly. So, what do you think about the list Clint Eastwood revealed? The names he never wanted to see at his own funeral? Do you agree with his choices, or do you think even legends should learn forgiveness? Let us know in the comments below. And if you've been moved by this story, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell icon, because more untold, shocking stories from Hollywood's greatest legends are still to come. The man with no name may one day fall silent, but his legend will never die.